I was strolling on the moon one day. Charlie, what are you doing with the dirt? You just threw it all over yourself.
If you believe we have crashed craft, do we have the bodies of the pilots who piloted this craft?
Okay, where is this on your property?
In my backyard. I swear to God, this is not a joke. This is actually, we terrified of it.
So there's two people or two subjects that are in your backyard?
Correct, and they're very large.
A top secret exchange program between the United States government and planet Serpo, located in the Zeta Reticuli star system, aka the planet of the short grays. The project was allegedly created under the administration of President John F. Kennedy after the US government saved the life of an alien, EVA-1, who crash-landed on Earth back in 1947. Entirely grateful and forever indebted to humanity, the alien began working with the US government and teaching them about his home planet, Serpo. When EVA-1 died, he left behind communications technology, which the government then used to eventually get into contact with other Serpo natives. That is when the government made arrangements to send 12 specially trained astronauts to planet Serpo so that they may learn about life outside of our atmosphere. In order to reach Serpo, the 12 astronauts had to travel through a wormhole, after which the majority of them got sick and one unfortunately died of an aneurysm. But of course they kept going and eventually they reached the alien planet. For a decade they studied life on Serpo before returning home and assuming entirely new identities in order to protect the security of the mission. Fair enough, I suppose.
So what are the origins of this Project Serpo tale? Well, like with most conspiracies in the modern age, it started gaining popularity online and took off from there. It all started in 2005 when a series of anonymous emails began circulating among UFO researchers and enthusiasts. These emails, which were allegedly from a retired US government official who remained anonymous, laid out this insane story about an extraterrestrial exchange program. We'll talk more about this anonymous individual later. The Project Serpo story started making the rounds way faster than these types of stories would have back in the day. It was 2005, the internet was still relatively new, in the grand scheme of things anyway, and the UFO community was just hungry for new, sensational stories. And this one, it's pretty much the definition of sensational.
Remember that alien that I mentioned, EVA-1, that crash-landed to Earth in 1947? Yeah, well that was actually the Roswell incident of 1947, and also the first time the US government supposedly made contact with aliens. As many of you are probably already aware, in 1947 an unidentified object crash-landed on some farmland in Roswell, New Mexico. When Area 51 was alerted of the incident, they rushed to the scene, collected the object, and released a statement saying that what had come spiraling down to Earth a few nights prior was nothing more than a weather balloon. But then they sent the object out to another base for testing, and another, and another. Why? Well, because it wasn't actually a weather balloon. It was an alien spacecraft containing 6 aliens, 5 of which had died in the crash, and one of which came to be known as Extraterrestrial Biological Entity Number 1, or EVA-1. EVA-1 was taken to the Air Force facility in Los Alamos, where he stayed until his death in 1952. During this time, he learned to communicate with the military and told them some pretty interesting things.
Now, if the US government is really working with these alien beings, where might they be carrying out their activities? Area 51? Some hidden base in Antarctica? Well, some say they could be operating from an even more top secret place. Dulce Base. Dulce Base supposedly sits deep beneath the Colorado-New Mexico border, close to Dulce, New Mexico. Dulce Base is said to be a secret facility where humans and aliens are working together, exchanging ideas and doing all sorts of experiments, multiple levels deep underground with high-tech labs. The rumors are that different alien species, from the Greys, from planet Serpo possibly, to the reptilians, are working hand in hand with the US government. As to what they're trying to accomplish, probably something really fun and good that we don't really need to bother worrying about. Stories about this place really started coming about from a man named Paul Benowitz, who claimed to have discovered an underground base near Dulce, full of gray aliens and humans. His claims caught a lot of attention, but Benowitz's mental health eventually declined, and he ended up in a mental hospital, passed away in 2003. And there's always been this rumor that he was part of a big, widespread misinformation campaign.
As I said, during EBA 1's time on Earth, he informed the US government of quite a few things. One being that Serpo natives, Ebans as they are referred to by humans, had actually been visiting Earth for the last 2,000 years with no issue. But unfortunately, this time new Earth radar technology that they don't have on Serpo caused the ship to go haywire and crash, killing the majority of the crew. In 1949, a similar thing happened. 6 Ebans crash landed, but this time unfortunately none of them made it. When the ship was examined, the military found a communications device, which they worked on with EBA 1 to repair. They got it working and sent out multiple distress signals, but it wasn't until after EBA 1's death in 1952 that they finally got a reply. Communications began between the US military and the Ebans. It took a while, but eventually they were able to understand one another. After learning about the 12 deceased Ebans stranded on Earth, the Ebans asked if they could come to Earth and retrieve the bodies. Of course, the military wanted something in return, so they came up with the exchange program. The military wanted tech, but the Ebans said, no, you're not ready for our tech. And so they proposed something else. In exchange for the bodies of their deceased, 12 astronauts could spend a decade on planet Serpo. Furthermore, an Eban would stay on Earth to assist the military. In 1964, the Ebans landed on Earth once again to retrieve the bodies, and Project Serpo, aka Project Crystal Night, as it has also been called, commenced.
The star system where these aliens are supposedly from has been at the center of some of the most famous alien abduction stories in history, including the Barney and Betty Hill abduction. Were these beings from Serpo, Ebans, or Greys, as they're typically called, responsible for abductions like this? The Barney and Betty Hill case is pretty interesting. In September of 1961, this American couple was driving through rural New Hampshire at night when they noticed strange lights in the sky that seemed to be tracking their car's movements. Barney decided to stop the car to get out and have a look, and what he allegedly saw were humanoid figures peering out from a hovering craft. The Hills peeled off as fast as they could, but they later realized they'd lost a pretty hefty chunk of time that they just didn't remember. But as the days passed, they started to remember things. They ended up reporting being taken aboard a UFO where they were subjected to medical examinations by beings described as small, with gray skin, oversized eyes, and tiny little anime mouths, that's the exact way they described it back then. It's a 60s term, anime mouths. Their account was one of the earliest descriptions of the now iconic image of your classic gray alien.
Of course, a regular mission to space is no walk in the park, but a mission to a faraway planet located in a star system entirely separate from our own, that's tough. And apparently so was the training process. It took an entire year of survival, escape, evasions, weapons, and psychological training for the 12 astronauts to become fully prepared for their mission. The crew consisted of scientists, linguists, pilots, 2 doctors, and a security officer. Over the course of a year, along with the standard training, one by one, each member of the crew was buried in a 6 by 5 foot box and kept there for 5 days as part of a training intensive. There was no light, no communication. Just a small air hole that allowed the astronauts to receive food and water and not suffocate to death. It was tough, but they all passed, and the pilots even went on to learn how to operate alien spacecrafts. When it came time to take off, the 12 astronauts, along with 40 tons of gear, which included 10 motorcycles and 3 jeeps, were loaded into the spacecraft using anti-gravity technology, and 1 Eban came along to assist in their journey. When the ship was all boarded, each astronaut went to their own individual pod and settled in for the long journey ahead.
All right, before we get to what they saw on that journey, let's have a little bit of fun here and talk about something that comes up more than you'd probably think when Project Serpo or just interactions between aliens and humans is discussed. Hybrids. Yeah, aliens creating human-alien hybrids, either through experimentation or, God forbid, actually getting it on. This kind of thing always feels like it's going down the same rabbit hole that creepy online fan fiction does, where it's like, I'm gonna write about my fantasy of Alf impregnating Willie Tanner. I don't know. I'm not trying to shame, live your lives, but the concept of humans and aliens breeding with each other always feels inherently silly to me. With that said though, this does often play into the Project Serpo conspiracy. Those astronauts were apparently on this planet for a while. Who knows who they met? One thing could have led to another. Plus, in all these reported UFO abduction cases, who knows what kind of nasty experiments those Greys could have been doing.
When the crew arrived at Serpo, the first thing they noticed was that it was barren, bright, and hot. Really hot. About 107 degrees Fahrenheit or 41 degrees Celsius. Quickly, they realized why. Planet Serpo had 2 suns, which are shown here in a photograph taken by one of the astronauts, allegedly. One of the suns was orbited by Serpo, and the other was off in the distance. Because of this, the planet never got dark, and the days were 40 hours long, meaning that their decade-long mission was actually going to take 13 human years. In total, there are about 650,000 Ebens living on the planet in small, separate village communities and houses made of some kind of concrete rubber substance. It was a primitive life, but at the same time, the Ebens were equipped with electricity and incredibly advanced technology. Families generally consisted of a male and female Eben, and each family was allowed to have a maximum of 2 children, which were hidden away until they reached the age of maturity. During their time on Serpo, the astronauts gathered as much information about the Ebens as they could. And if you guys remember, I do believe I mentioned that one of the astronauts died on transit. Apparently the Ebens used that astronaut to clone and create hybrids of, like James mentioned. And it was then that the remaining astronauts realized that they weren't as peaceful as they once thought them to be. When it came time to return home, for some reason, 2 of the astronauts actually decided to stay, and then 2 more astronauts died on the way back to Earth. The surviving astronauts were given a large sum of money and an entirely new identity. That's great and all, but many of them were suffering from radiation poisoning due to the 2 suns and died soon after their return to Earth.
One of the most avid supporters of the Project Serpo conspiracy is a man named Richard Doughty, who we can't really talk about Serpo without talking about this guy. See, Richard Doughty has made some pretty outlandish claims, so outlandish that there's a whole other conspiracy that spawned around him and other government officials like him. Supposedly, Doughty was the man behind those anonymous emails I talked about earlier. Richard Doughty is a retired special agent who used to work for AFOSI, the United States Air Force Office of Special Investigation. But a lot of people think he wasn't actually investigating UFOs, but that he was part of a team spreading misinformation intentionally, basically muddying the waters and leaking supposedly secret info about the government's exchange program with alien beings in order to confuse the public, making it hard for us to tell what's real or not. Of course, the purpose behind the misinformation is, of course, to distract everyone from the actual nefarious things the government is up to. I mean, who doesn't get excited about aliens, right? I'm sure we'd all rather believe that the worst thing the government is doing is working with extraterrestrials instead of them doing some shady stuff at our own expense. Could there be some genuine truth about the planet Serpo thing? I mean, sure, maybe, but you know, just something to keep in mind with stuff like this. Certainly don't look human to me, but it's not just because they're very old sculptures. I mean, they look intentionally not human. They look reptilian. The noses, or lack thereof, the eyes, if these were meant to resemble people, they did a bad job. Either that or these were really horrifying looking folks. But if they're not meant to be humans, then what exactly are they? The statues are often referred to as the Ubaid lizard men. The 7,000-year-old artifacts were uncovered in Iraq in the 20th century. There are theories as to what these things could be, but no definitive evidence. Unfortunately, we don't have any written records of the time, so determining the ideas behind people's artistic expression in prehistoric Mesopotamia, it's not really the easiest, but I'm pretty fascinated by the idea that there may have been some reptilian aliens visiting Earth around this time that people were depicting here.
Definitive proof of life beyond our planet found inside of a meteorite that landed in Sri Lanka back in December of 2013. Yeah. When pieces of the space rock were gathered and examined back in 2013, a shocking discovery was made. The debris of the meteor contained fossils, algae fossils, of clear extraterrestrial origin, according to lead scientist Professor Chandra Wickramasinghe. Because algae is technically alive, if Professor Chandra's science is correct, the discovery marks the first documented discovery discovery of life that originated from outside of our atmosphere. While the legitimacy of the work has been debated amongst Chandra's peers who claim that the algae may have been embedded into the meteorite during its time on Earth, the professor is standing firm in his discovery and has claimed that among the algae fossils he discovered were other organisms that are not yet identified and do not match anything discovered on Earth thus far, which of course is great news for those of us who are really hoping that Chandra's discovery of extraterrestrial life is legitimate and that the doubters are just mad they weren't able to make the discovery for themselves.
Are these sculptures of planes? They kind of look like stylized planes to me, but that would be impossible because these are thousands of years old. They're artifacts from what is known as the Kumbaya period, a pre-Columbian culture which was around from about 500 BC to 680. They were known for their skill in metalwork. I mean, obviously these things are lovely, but yeah, they really do look remarkably like modern airplanes. They have wings that don't really look like bird wings to me, and a lot of them even have what look like tail fins. So how and why were these created? Did these people somehow have knowledge of what the future of air travel was going to look like? Were they encountering beings with highly advanced technology? The official explanation is that these are depictions of animals, insects, birds, that sort of thing, and yeah, there's a very good chance that's all these are, but I can't deny how eerily accurate they look to modern flying machines. And here's another really interesting thing. In 1994, a group of German engineers actually built scale models of the Kumbaya artifacts to see if they could fly, and guess what? They did, with an added propulsion system of course, but the designs worked. They were aerodynamically perfect and could fly.
The Williams Enigmalith. What is it? Well, I'm not entirely sure, but it's definitely from out of this world. It looks a bit like a rock with a plug, but it's not a rock with a plug, and it's far from being just an ordinary rock. The object was found in 1998 by a hiker named John J. Williams. He noticed a strange piece of metal coming out of the dirt on his hiking trail, and so he dug it up. When he did, he revealed a rock with 3 metal prongs sticking out of it. It looked somehow man-made and appeared to have some kind of electrical component to it. Why? Well, I'm not sure, but Williams, who is an electrical engineer, claims that the electronic component embedded in the stone was not glued or welded into the granite rock surrounding it, meaning that while it appears to have possibly been man-made because electrical components don't just naturally exist inside of rocks, especially ones dated to be around 100,000 years old, it must be something else, perhaps from somewhere else, perhaps somewhere out of this world. While Williams is open to having others research the strange rock, he does have a few conditions. He must be present for whatever discovery is made, and the rock must remain unharmed. Even with these parameters, you would think that by using modern day tools and technology, we would have been able to get an answer as to what exactly the rock is by now, and where the electrical component is coming from and how it was embedded. But no such discovery has been made, leaving the leading theory to be that its origins are likely not of this earth, and that it likely holds the answers to questions we haven't even thought to ask yet.
No one is exactly sure what this thing is. It's been dubbed the Wedge of Iud and was found in Romania in 1973. Workers came across it while digging during a construction project. It was found buried along with 2 large mastodon bones. The wedge is around 5 pounds and it's made of aluminum. Now this turns out to be pretty strange because aluminum wasn't widely used until the 19th century, but this thing is estimated to be much older, at least 250,000 years old. It's a very odd looking object. It looks like a modern art piece or something, but what exactly is it? Well, again, nobody really knows for sure, but one of the funnest theories, of course, is that it's extraterrestrial in origin, maybe having come off an ancient alien spacecraft or something.
The Sumerian Triumph Tapestry, which appears to not only depict the succession of various rulers to the throne, but also the presence of UFOs hovering above the Sumerian people, is next on our list today. The tapestry was created in the capital of West Flanders province in the Flemish region of Belgium around 1538, and since then it has been the subject of many many conspiracy theories, which makes sense considering the two alien spaceship-looking objects depicted in the top left corner of the piece. Now, if you know anything about the Sumerian people or the Anunnaki, you are likely well aware that even without the presence of the Triumph Tapestry, the Sumerians are a pretty good argument for the legitimacy of aliens having had a pretty prominent presence on Earth in the past. Adding the tapestry into the mix is really just the cherry on top of the extraterrestrial cake, because it confirms how the Anunnaki, the ultra-intelligent alien species that ordered the creation of the pyramids, arrived on Earth in the first place. If you don't know anything about the Sumerians, ancient Sumeria, and the Anunnaki, but would like to, I do have a video on them titled Ancient Sumerian Mysteries That May Never Be Explained that you can watch after this.
Next, we have the Casso artifact, known as one of the world's out-of-place artifacts. It was discovered in 1961 near Olancha, California. While out looking for geodes, these rock collectors found a strange rock that seemed out of place, and when they cut it open, they were surprised to find it actually had a metal core inside. The outer layer of the rock was encrusted with a hard substance, while the inner metal core was a cylindrical object that looked almost like a spark plug. This was not what anyone had been expecting to find, because the rock seemed to be millions of years old, far older than the age of modern machinery. So it sparked, see what I did there? It sparked a lot of curiosity. Some researchers think this is just a naturally occurring geode that somehow formed around a modern spark plug, but what if it's not the case? What if it's a piece of ancient technology left by an advanced civilization? Or even more interesting, an object that some extraterrestrial beings left behind a long time ago.
I'm sure by now we've all heard the theories that the pyramids were built by aliens, which is a fair assumption considering the fact that historians have been consistently unable to come up with an explanation as to how the construction of the pyramids would have been possible in ancient times. But what about other massive artifacts like Stonehenge, or perhaps the massive stone head that was found in the middle of the Guatemalan jungle in the 1930s? The statue dates back to before the Spanish Revolution, so prior to the Mayan and Aztec empires falling to the Spanish armies, which is strange considering 1, there is little to no way the Mayans living in the area could have sculpted the stone head and placed it in the area, and 2, if somehow they did, why doesn't it look like them? The statue's features do not mimic those of the ancient Mayans or Aztecs. Because of this, it is believed that the features once displayed on the head, which have since worn down due to revolutionary troops using the historic artifact as target practice, were actually the features of an ancient alien civilization that was far more intelligent than humanity, and that likely had a hand in the construction of the Mayan and perhaps even the Aztec empires as well.
This next one is actually 100% known to be from space. Back in June of last year, Harvard professor and theoretical astrophysicist Avi Loeb led an excavation to Papua New Guinea to uncover the remnants of a meteor that had crashed into the Pacific Ocean, and what they found were small spherical space rocks from deep in space, and there's still a question as to whether the object they came from was naturally occurring or not. What they do know is that the small spheres are made up of elements we don't have here on Earth. Loeb wrote, quote, "This is a historic discovery because it represents the first time that humans put their hands on materials from a large object that arrived to Earth from outside the solar system."
Finally, we have an incredibly mysterious extraterrestrial object discovered by the Betts family in 1974. That year, a mysterious fire had broken out on the family's property that destroyed 88 acres of woodland. When the Bettses went out to explore the area and search for the cause of the mysterious fire, they stumbled across a metal sphere with a diameter of just 8 inches and a weight of almost 20 pounds. At first, the family thought that the object might have belonged to the Soviet Union or perhaps NASA. They thought about leaving it where they found it, but curiosity got the better of them, and so they decided to take it home. About 2 weeks later, the family's son was playing guitar while sitting next to the strange spherical object when all of a sudden it began to emit a strange resonating sound that caused the family dog to act up. A while later, the family discovered that when they pushed the sphere across the floor away from themselves, it would change direction and return to the person who had pushed it. Not only that, but the object avoided avoided being damaged at all costs, rolling up slanted tables to keep itself from crashing on the floor, and eventually it began emitting pulsing sounds seemingly out of nowhere. The strange behavior was witnessed by scientists as well as representatives from the military, so you don't just have to take the Betts family's word for it. At first, the Betts family refused to let the ball out of their possession, but after doors started slamming shut and music began randomly playing in their home, they handed it over to the authorities, who were shocked to discover that the metal ball was just that, a metal ball, or so it appeared. While there is no solid explanation as to why the sphere displayed such strange properties and caused so many strange things to happen, I think we can all agree that the most likely reason is because it came from outer space with a purpose that has yet to reveal itself to mankind.
At the time of this recording, NASA has just launched a craft the other day set to head to Jupiter's moon to discover if life exists there. On October 14th, NASA launched the Europa Clipper spacecraft on a mission to explore Jupiter's moon, Europa, which scientists believe might have conditions suitable for life. The spacecraft lifted off from Kennedy Space Center in Florida on a SpaceX Falcon Heavy rocket. This mission aims to investigate Europa's subsurface ocean, hidden beneath an ice shell that could be up to 25 kilometers thick. Europa is about a quarter of the size of Earth, but it's believed to contain twice as much water as all of Earth's oceans combined. This makes it one of the most promising locations for finding potential life out in space, at least that we know of. The Europa Clipper is the largest spacecraft ever built for a planetary mission. It's about 100 feet long, equipped with 9 scientific instruments designed to measure the internal ocean and analyze the composition of the moon's surface. The spacecraft will conduct 49 close flybys of Europa starting in 2031, getting as close as 15.5 miles to the surface. So unfortunately, we do have quite a while to wait before we hear anything, but the fact that NASA is actively seeking out life on a distant moon is pretty cool. Fingers crossed they find something. Just last year, NASA released a highly anticipated 36-page report on UFOs or UAPs, and there were some interesting takeaways. They looked into hundreds of sightings but concluded that they didn't find any solid evidence that aliens were behind any of them. Still, they didn't completely rule out the possibility either. NASA Administrator Bill Nelson made it clear that the agency is stepping up its game in researching these mysterious encounters. He said they'll be using better tech and artificial intelligence to dig deeper into them. The report is pretty technical, but one key takeaway is that it stated there is no reason to conclude extraterrestrial sources are responsible for these sightings. But the report also didn't deny the possibility of, quote, potential unknown alien technology operating in Earth's atmosphere. So that's pretty cool. Nicola Fox, who's part of NASA's Science Mission Directorate, said UAPs are still one of our planet's biggest mysteries. The challenge? A lot of the data they have just isn't good enough to draw any solid conclusions about what these sightings really are. To tackle this, NASA brought in a new director of UAP research, but they're keeping their identity a secret. This person will build a database to track and analyze future sightings, and using AI and machine learning. It's a smart move, especially since Dr. Daniel Evans mentioned that some members of the UAP panel had faced, quote, actual threats, which is unsettling, so keeping the new director's identity hidden is really about protecting their safety. The Falcon Lake incident began on May 20th, 1967 in Falcon Lake, Manitoba, Canada. This event is often been called Canada's best documented UFO case, and for good reason. It all started with Stephen McCallick, an industrial mechanic and amateur geologist. He was exploring the area in search of precious metals when he suddenly heard a commotion from a flock of geese, and he looked up to see 2 strange objects hovering about 150 feet away, which he described as cigarette-shaped things with humps in the middle, glowing with a reddish hue. One of the crafts then landed on a nearby rocky platform, transforming into a shiny disc that looked like, quote, hot stainless steel. McCallick sketched the craft for about a half an hour before deciding that he wanted to get a closer look. As he approached, he noticed it was completely smooth, but the craft had an open door where he could hear muffled voices. Then he reached out and touched the craft, which was so hot it melted the fingertips of his gloves. As he turned to leave, understandably, a panel then opened up, releasing a blast of heated gas that knocked him back, setting his clothes on fire. McCulloch barely managed to escape, feeling nauseous and disoriented. He was so sick he was unable to eat solid food in the days following the incident, and was treated for burns that doctors said resembled radiation injuries. His story caught the attention of the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Air Force, and even US authorities. And when they reached the site that McCulloch said he spotted the craft, authorities found a 15-foot ring of burnt vegetation, and there were highly radioactive elements found in soil samples and in the clothing McCulloch had been wearing on the day of the encounter, which he had to rip off because they were on fire. And there was also superheated metal that had melted into the cracks of rocks, also highly radioactive. Till this day, the case has not been explained. This incident is referred to as South Africa's Roswell, the Kalahari crash. Kind of tells you how significant this one was. So the story goes that this whole incident was covered up. Some of the details of this one are a bit vague, and some chalk this up to being a hoax, but there were supposed leaked documents describing the following events. So this was an unusual event that took place over the Indian Ocean on May 7th, 1989. According to reports, a fast-moving object, believed to be a UFO, was spotted by naval personnel. In response, fighter jets were sent to intercept and target it. The UFO was successfully hit and crashed in the Kalahari Desert, leaving a noticeable skid mark. Shortly after the crash, a US recovery team was swiftly deployed to gather evidence from the site and transport it to Patterson Air Force Base. And not only were parts of the aircraft retrieved, but the bodies of 2 alien beings as well. The Tic Tac UFO incident is one of the most compelling pieces of evidence in the world of unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAPs. On November 14th of 2004, retired Navy Commander David Fravor, a pilot with the USS Nimitz, had an encounter during a training exercise off the coast of Southern California. Fravor was flying with Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich when they were directed to investigate an unusual radar signal detected by the USS Princeton, another ship in their strike group. The radar operators had spotted, quote, multiple anomalous aerial vehicles that descended from 80,000 feet to sea level in less than a second. Fravor and Dietrich diverted to get a closer look, and as they approached, Fravor described seeing a small white object that looked almost like a tic-tac, hovering above the ocean waves. He recalled in a 2021 interview that the object seemed to respond to their movements, as if it was aware that they were there. The Tic Tac was about the size of Fravor's jet, but had no visible markings, no wings or exhaust plumes. He attempted to cut it off, but the object accelerated away so quickly that it vanished from sight, only to be detected 60 miles away in less than a minute. Fravor stated, "I think what we experienced was well beyond the material science and the capabilities that we had at the time, that we have currently, or that we're going to have in the next 10 to 20 years. This incident came out in a report revealing over 500 sightings since 2004, some of which, including this one, are still unexplained. The 1952 Washington, D.C. UFO incident, often referred to as the Washington Flap, is one of the craziest UFO reports in history. Over 2 weekends in July of that year, people in the Capitol began reporting a series of strange sightings in the sky. On the night of July 19th, radar operators at Washington National Airport picked up a cluster of unknown objects flying at incredible speeds. Ground witnesses described seeing bright lights darting around erratically. The following night, the sightings continued, and the US Air Force sent up fighter jets to chase the mysterious objects. Pilots in the jets reported seeing glowing lights that seemed to defy the laws of physics, making sudden accelerations and sharp turns that no conventional aircraft could replicate. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Richard French was an investigator for Project Blue Book in the 50s. In 2013, during a citizen hearing on disclosure, he told a pretty wild story. While working for Project Blue Book, his job had often just involved debunking UFO sightings, but there was one incident that he had no explanation for. French recounted an incident had happened while he was investigating off the coast of St. John's, Newfoundland. Reports had come in about 2 mysterious aircraft that supposedly crashed in the water. French followed a group of around 100 onlookers gathered on a nearby wharf What he saw next was something he'd never be able to forget. He described encountering 2 to 3 foot tall beings that were thin and gray, seemingly working on their damaged crafts in the water. French and the onlookers watched as these strange beings repaired their vessels right before his eyes. Then the craft lifted out of the water and shot off into the sky. He never included this sighting in his official reports at the time, probably fearing he'd be laughed out of his job. The Indian Ocean has a long history of mysterious sightings, with reports of strange underwater objects dating back as far as 1873. A number of sailors have described encounters with these massive, mile-wide discs lurking beneath the surface of the water, sometimes accompanied by eerie lights. One of the earliest documented sightings occurred on March 23, 1873, when the ship Adelheid was navigating the South China Sea. Crew members claimed to see this huge glowing circular object floating just below the water. And then, May 15, 1879, the crew of the HMS Vulture spotted 2 enormous Ferris wheel type objects spinning in opposite directions. Each spoke about 25 feet wide and spaced about 100 feet apart. On April 14, 1901, sailors aboard the SS Kilwa reported beams of light shining from an underwater disc-like object in the Persian Gulf. Then in 1943, a sailor named Matthew Mangle noticed a massive glowing disc keeping pace with his ship. Next on the list we have the Rendlesham Forest incident. This one is very well documented. It took place in December of 1980 near the Rendlesham Forest in Suffolk, England. Late at night on December 26th of 1980, military personnel witnessed strange lights descending into the forest. At first they figured it was just a downed aircraft, a known one. What they found definitely seemed to be an aircraft, just not one they'd ever seen before. They came across what seemed to be a metallic object on the forest floor and would see strange lights in the sky. Some reported that the object they saw was triangular and emitted strange beams of light. One of the airmen even claimed to have touched the object. There are official documents that have been released about this story with full reports by the military personnel at the site, and what they described was pretty strange. Now, did they actually encounter an alien spacecraft? It's debatable, but what is clear is that they saw something out of the ordinary. And finally, we have one of the most mysterious and destructive crash landings of all time, the Tunguska event. On June 30th, 1908, a massive blast hit this remote area of Russia. The event is believed to have been caused by the airburst of a large object of some kind, most likely a comet or asteroid, entering Earth's atmosphere and exploding in mid-air. The explosion released an enormous amount of energy and flattened about 80 million trees in the area. Now, luckily this happened in a very remote area, so only trees were affected, but that also means there were very few witnesses. A handful of people did report seeing a bright bluish light in the sky though, accompanied by a series of thunderous noises. And there's always been this question as to whether this was caused by a space rock or something else. Apparently there was also mutated plant life after this impact, and Joseph Stalin is rumored to have even conducted secret experiments in the area, but that's more of an urban legend. In 1975, a pilot and several passengers flying a private plane near Pine Gap's airspace saw something they would never forget. The facility had only started operating 5 years before. Everyone was wondering what the hell was really going on in there, and the passengers and crew were hoping they were going to see something while flying overhead, and see something they did. A large white object appeared, taking off from the base at an incredibly high speed. The object moved so fast that it was nearly impossible for the witnesses to get a good look at it before it vanished into the sky. The pilot, upon landing, reported the sighting. They were told to wait for investigators, and when these investigators arrived, they supposedly told the group to keep their mouths shut about what they'd seen and to forget the incident entirely. Obviously, not all of them did, and if there wasn't already heavy speculation and controversy about this facility amongst the Australian public before, there certainly was now. Now, what exactly is the Pine Gap facility? Sitting right in the middle of the outback, not too far from the remote town of Alice Springs, officially it's known as the Joint Defense Facility Pine Gap, and it's run by both the US and Australian governments. But what exactly goes on there? Like with any facility like this, there's the official answer and the more speculative ones. The facility is decked out with some serious tech. You know those big satellite dishes you see in movies? Pine Gap has plenty of them. They're used for all sorts of high-tech communication and surveillance activity. Officially, the facility is involved in intelligence gathering, satellite tracking, and missile detection. It's always been a controversial place though. It's seen a number of protests over the years, and many of them aren't even necessarily to do with the rumors and conspiracies, but they certainly don't help with its image. Pine Gap is rumored to be a secret site for advanced technology testing. Again, much like claims made about Area 51. A place where the military can try out their fancy new tech far away from the prying eyes of the public. And if you were gonna pick a spot for a test flight over your new advanced drone or aircraft, the Australian outback would be about as ideal as it gets. Ever seen Mad Max? Nothing out there but sand and kangaroos. I don't think there's actually any kangaroos in Mad Max, but you get my point. One of the main theories is that Pine Gap is involved in developing and testing advanced drones and aircraft. These drones could be used for anything from reconnaissance missions to lethal attacks. More on that next though. There are also rumors about Pine Gap being involved in cyber warfare testing, so developing new ways to protect against hacking or creating offensive strategies to mess with enemy computers. That's really the best way I can put it without doing a deep dive into exactly what hackers do on this kind of scale. I don't really know much about hacking other than the error messages I'd get that would screw up my janky old PC in the days of LimeWire. One of the biggest conspiracies is that Pine Gap is involved in operating spy satellites. I'd say a big part of this is the fact that it's jointly operated by the United States and Australia. It's partly run by the CIA, so that leads to some speculation for sure. It's rumored that Pine Gap plays a huge role in monitoring communications, radar, and other electronic signals from all over the world. The facility's remote location and the sophisticated tech make it a pretty ideal setup for controlling and receiving data from spy satellites orbiting Earth. There's a lot of speculation that Pine Gap works with various intelligence agencies to gather information on foreign military activity, enemy organizations, and just various global threats. I mean, this is barely even in the realm of conspiracy. It is a fact. It's involved in intelligence gathering, so I don't think spy satellites are really all that much of a stretch. It's really more of a question of, well, what exactly does this entail? Of course, they don't provide specifics because that would kind of defeat the purpose of the whole spying thing. Another one of the numerous conspiracy theories surrounding Pine Gap is its alleged role as an NSA or National Security Agency listening post. Edward Snowden famously brought this up, and it certainly makes the whole thing feel a lot more credible. According to the theory, Pine Gap is involved in surveillance and data collection, targeting domestic and international communications, using its advanced listening technology to intercept phone calls, your emails. Edward Snowden isn't the only guy to come out having said this though. There are other whistleblower testimonies alleging that Pine Gap collaborates closely with the NSA to gather intelligence. Their claim is that the facility's ideal location and the powerful antennas make for intercepting large amounts of data, which is then processed and analyzed by intelligence analysts. Another intense rumor about Pine Gap is that it's involved in coordinating lethal drone strikes. Pine Gap is believed to have the tech and connections to control and direct drones used in targeted killings. So we already know they have the technology to efficiently gather intelligence and track targets. So once a target is identified, the data is sent to operators who can launch and guide drones to hit specific targets, often in remote or hard to reach areas. These drones can carry out precision strikes, taking out high value targets with little to no risk to any human soldiers. The idea that Pine Gap could be involved in operations like this, again, stems from the fact that it's another hub for US intelligence and military agencies. So it's no secret that the US has used drones for targeted strikes in various parts of the world, and Pine Gap's advanced technology would be a major asset for this type of thing. Accusations about drone strikes have been denied, but I mean, of course, they're gonna deny something like that. Targeted drone strikes are probably the most controversial part of modern warfare. After one drone strike in July of 2013 in Pakistan, campaigners claimed the intelligence for the strike came from Pine Gap. There was a ton of outrage, and a number of human rights groups called for a UN inquiry into whether the Australian government could be seen as complicit in the strikes alongside the US military. There were even some allegations that Australian officials might have facilitated targeted killing, which would be against international law. Now, on to the stuff you've all been waiting for, of course, aliens and UFOs. Pine Gap has been a hotspot for conspiracy theories involving extraterrestrial research pretty much ever since it began operations. Some people are convinced that the facility is hiding evidence of alien life and is deeply involved in studying them and their technology. And this isn't just a situation of like, oh well, a big top secret government facility, gotta be aliens, right? No, there have been a lot of strange sightings in the area surrounding Pine Gap. Some people will even claim that Pine Gap is part of a global network of secret bases that collaborate on extraterrestrial research. Again, the American involvement certainly plays into this, so Pine Gap may be another facility like Area 51, according to the conspiracy anyway, where captured alien technology is reverse engineered. This could mean everything from developing new energy sources to building advanced propulsion systems similar to ones aliens could be using. There's also rumors that Pine Gap has underground facilities specifically designed for housing alien artifacts and possibly even extraterrestrial beings themselves. Let's get into some detail on a UFO sighting specifically, shall we? One of the most talked about encounters at Pine Gap happened early in the morning on December 22nd of 1989. So 3 men were heading home after an all-night hunting trip when something out of the ordinary caught their attention. It was around 4:30 a.m. when they noticed what looked like a door. It was camouflaged to blend into its surroundings. Suddenly it opened right in front of them, and from behind it there was a huge metallic gray disc. The disc moved slightly, hovering over the base for a few moments. The hunters stood there, frozen in shock, and watched as this disc shot upwards and then vanished into the sky. As they tried to process what they'd just seen, they saw the camouflage door slowly move back into place, sealing shut as if it had never been there. Pine Gap employs around 1,000 people, and most of them live in the nearby town of Alice Springs. The workers are a mix of Australian and US intelligence personnel, but Alice Springs has a large American population, thanks to Pine Gap obviously, and visitors and townsfolk will often say, if you ask any of these Americans about their jobs, the common answer you'll get is that they're gardeners. It's apparently so common that it's become kind of an inside joke. Are all these people who say they're gardeners really gardeners, or could gardener be a cover for the real work these individuals do at the facility? Some people think that these so-called gardeners are involved in secretive operations at Pine Gap. Gardening, it's a pretty low-key profession, makes for a pretty convenient front for intelligence personnel who want to avoid drawing attention. At least that's what I'd say if everyone else hadn't picked that front too. I mean, you know, baker, carpenter, plenty of jobs to pick from, guys. Weather control. No, Pine Gap isn't even safe from accusations of weather control. This theory is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. The idea is that the facility has the capability to manipulate weather patterns, using advanced technology to create or alter it. And maybe they have help from some of that alien technology they're reverse engineering. Again, even without the possible secret alien technology hidden inside, people see the sophisticated equipment combined with the secretive nature of the facility, and questions start to form in people's heads like, could they be playing God and screwing with the weather? Could they be using methods like cloud seeding or even more advanced techniques, creating rain and drought-stricken areas? That would be nice. Or maybe they're working on ways to weaponize the weather. The concept of weather control isn't entirely far-fetched either. Various governments have been known to have explored weather modification in the past.
The Roswell incident is arguably the most famous UFO crash in history, although the government would claim otherwise. Basically, on June 24th of 1947, while searching for a crashed military aircraft, pilot Kenneth Arnold spotted 9 UFOs flying over the Cascade Mountains of Washington state in the US. The objects were flying in formation at a height of about 10,000 feet and a speed of approximately 1,900 kilometers per hour, which was not possible at the time, for humans that is. Kenneth described the way the objects moved as jerky, like rocks skipping over the water, flashing forward at strange intervals. When the media got a hold of the story, they coined the phrase flying saucer, and the UFO craze took off at hyperspeed. Especially when on July 7th, a local rancher named Mac Brazel called the sheriff to let him know that one of those objects had somehow ended up on his farm, and this came to be known as the Roswell incident.
It was back in July of 1947 that something strange happened near Roswell, New Mexico. Something had crashed into the ground, into Brazel's farm. There were metal pieces, rubber strips, and a strange tin foil-like material. The nearby Roswell Army airfield was alerted. The military came out and collected the debris. At first, they issued a press release saying they had recovered an unknown flying disc. This really got people talking, but just a day later the Army changed their story, saying it was actually just a weather balloon. Now, while some of the public took this at face value, it caused some controversy, especially in the years to come. People started to believe that the military was covering up something much bigger, possibly an alien spacecraft crash. Over the years, people started to come forward claiming to have seen the wreckage, and not only were there strange markings on the material described by some as hieroglyphics, but the material was incredibly strong and seemed to almost be impossible to burn. Oh, and of course, people who'd been called to the site to recover the material claimed to have seen bodies that were clearly not human. Over the years, many people have questioned the official explanation for this incident. Even former military personnel and locals said they saw strange things at the crash site, like debris that didn't look like it came from any known aircraft, and even small bodies that didn't seem human. In 1994, the US Air Force released a report saying the debris was from a top secret project called Project Mogul, a project that used high altitude balloons to detect Soviet nuclear tests. They said the unusual materials found were just parts of these balloons and their sensors, but this explanation didn't satisfy everyone. In 1997, on the 50th anniversary of the incident, the Air Force released another report to address the claims about these alien bodies. They said these were actually just crash test dummies used in military experiments, not extraterrestrial beings. But again, a lot of people were and still are highly skeptical of this. The Roswell incident happened less than 2 years after the atomic bombs were dropped on Japan in 1945. Those bombs were created through a secret project that lasted 3 years and had 3 main sites, including one in New Mexico. So if the government could keep the atomic bomb a secret for so long, why wouldn't they be able and willing to hide information about a crashed UFO landing? Plus, little mannequins? I think most people would look at that and be able to tell the difference between an alien and a crash test dummy.
So this foreign object that landed on Mac Brazel's farm actually did so a few days prior to him calling into the sheriff's department. To be honest, he hadn't thought much of it until he started reading about Kenneth Arnold, flying saucers, and UFOs in the papers. Once he learned about the possible presence of technologically advanced ships with no known origin that likely came from outer space, he began to wonder if that was in fact what had landed on his farm just a few nights ago. And so he gathered up some of the debris and took them down to the local police station. In response, the sheriff immediately contacted the nearby army base, and soon intelligence officer Jesse Marcel had arrived on the scene and instructed Brazel to take him to the crash site so that the two could collect more debris. So let's talk about Jesse Marcel, the first military officer to step foot on the scene of the crash, because apparently Jesse had a lot to say, according to his son Jesse Jr., who went on to tell his father's story after his death in 1986. According to Jesse Jr., in 1947, when he was just 10 years old, his father woke him up in the middle of the night, excited after having visited the crash site. Jesse Jr. sat up as Jesse Sr. handed him some of the debris he had collected earlier that day on Brazel's farm, and he told Jesse Jr. to get a good look because the debris were something that he would never see again. They were not not of this earth, and the pair simply could not make sense of them. Out of all of the debris his father had brought home, Jesse Jr. said that the one that fascinated him most was a small beam with purple-hued hieroglyphics. I suppose it's not difficult to see why the pair didn't believe the government when they released a report saying that what had been found on the Brazils farm was nothing more than a discarded weather balloon. But of course, you don't mess with the government. And so for years, both Jesse Jr. and his father kept quiet about what they had seen. That is until in the late 1970s, a man named Stanton Friedman showed up asking questions. Stanton T. Friedman, a nuclear physicist turned ufologist, tracked down Jesse Sr. after being tipped off that a retired military man might know something about the Roswell incident, something that had been kept from the public for the past 31 years. And it turns out he did. Jesse Sr. told Freeman that the weather balloon story had in fact been a cover-up, and that the original wreckage had been replaced with a weather balloon shortly after military personnel first arrived on the scene. Not only that, but Jesse claimed that despite what their superiors had wanted them to believe, it was incredibly clear to everyone working on the site that the object had in fact been an extraterrestrial spaceship with outstanding craftsmanship and incredibly advanced out-of-this-world technologies. Although, unfortunately, Jesse did claim that he never got to witness the alleged aliens inside of the craft being pulled out, but still, he's ex-military. He was there. It's a pretty compelling case, if you ask me.
There are also witnesses aside from Brazils claiming to have seen some strange things. So many of these witnesses stayed silent for years, but eventually began speaking out to close friends or family about what they'd seen, still fearing repercussions from the government. There was another crash site about 40 miles from Brazils Ranch where more wreckage and alien bodies were said to be being recovered. A firefighter who went to this site claimed that he saw a large disc in the ground and several small, non-human bodies nearby. He said that military officials told him to keep quiet about what he saw. Sergeant Melvin Brown also shared his experience. He said he rode in a truck with the bodies from the crash site to Roswell Field and then stood guard at the hangar where they were first kept. He was instructed not to look under a tarp, but he got curious and he peeked. He claimed he saw 2 alien bodies. The government has always denied his claims, but several people who were there or knew people who were there have said they saw wreckage and bodies arrive at Wright Field. Retired General Arthur Exon stated that a top secret committee was set up to oversee the investigation of this and other classified UFO incidents. After the Roswell crash, the debris was secretly flown from Fort Worth, Texas to Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio. At Wright Field, Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Exon, who later became the base commander, recalled that some of the material was very thin, but incredibly strong. And it wasn't just metal that arrived at Wright Field either. At the second crash site a few miles from the first, they discovered a smaller, more intact craft and 4 bodies lying nearby. These bodies did not look human. Again, according to witnesses, the bodies were described as being in fairly good condition despite having been exposed for 6 days. Some parts of the bodies have been chewed on by animals. Descriptions from those who saw the bodies are pretty consistent. They were said to be 4 to 5 feet tall, with big heads, large eyes, and small mouths. Basically your classic idea of an alien. They had thin bodies with long arms and 4 fingers. An army nurse who worked on the initial autopsy described how fragile the skulls and bones were too. The bodies were quickly placed in large, sealed wooden crates, loaded onto a B-29 bomber and flown to Fort Worth before being sent to Wright Field.
Now, the general public weren't the only ones concerned with the Roswell crash. In fact, one of the highest members of government was too, the president, which at the time was Harry S. Truman. After the incident took place, Truman became increasingly interested and concerned with UFOs, so much so that in 1948 he called a meeting with his military aide, Colonel Robert Laundrie, in the Oval Office to discuss UFO reports and what they might mean for the security of the country. Laundrie told Truman that, quote, all manner of objects and things were being seen in the sky by people as of late, which only led the president to worry more about the possibility of new, never-before-seen threats to the American people. And so Truman ordered a quarterly oral report from both Laundrie and the Air Force to be presented to him at the White House to discuss whether or not the UFO sightings would present any kind of immediate danger. Although neither the military or the Air Force were ever able or willing to provide Truman with any answers, the UFO sightings kept coming, and officials became more and more confused. To this day, it's unclear what information the government has gathered on UFOs, but what we do know is that if they do in fact have concrete evidence supporting the existence of alien life forms, they sure as heck aren't sharing it with us. Yet. Fingers crossed.
The Roswell incident was the catalyst for pretty much every modern UFO conspiracy today. Before Roswell, the idea of aliens was just that, really, an idea. But when stories about this mysterious crash hit the papers, it really changed the public's view of the possibility of alien life forever. Suddenly, what people had read about in science fiction and fantasy novels or watched on the big screen was something a lot more concrete. Project Blue Book formed a few years after the Roswell incident, a genuine Air Force program dedicated to investigating UFOs, at least in the early days. Area 51, the mysterious Men in Black, Majestic 12, all of these things started being whispered about in the years following the Roswell incident.
The first image is a screen grab from a video filmed by a US Marine officer on the 20th of April in 2021 on a military base in 29 Palms, California. After the release of the photograph, multiple Marines came forward to confirm the existence of an aircraft, saying that while the photo showcases only the triangle-shaped formation of bright lights, in person the men were able to make out the black body of the aircraft as well. The unidentified flying object is said to have hovered for 10 minutes in the air before it suddenly vanished without any trace. The men were able to rule out flares for being the cause of the mysterious lights, but were never able to figure out exactly what they saw that night. However, it appears the footage has not been taken lightly, as the Pentagon has started an investigation into just what exactly was seen on the night of April 20th of 2021 in the skies above the 29 Palms military base. Next up, we have a series of photographs taken by cosmonaut Ivan Vanger in August of 2020 whilst aboard the International Space Station that appears to depict 5 unidentified flying objects flying at the same speed while maintaining the same distance between each other as well as their surroundings, moving in a straight line just above the Earth's curved horizon visible in the night sky. Vanguard, both surprised and curious, took to Twitter, now named X, to share the footage in hopes of getting some clarity as to exactly what he was looking at. In an exciting unfolding of events, his tweet was picked up by the Russian space agency Roscosmos, and a spokesperson revealed that experts were in fact studying the video in an attempt to determine what exactly Vanguard had managed to capture. Did you guys know that Japan was a major hotbed for UFO activity? Because I didn't. But apparently the Pentagon does? In fact, UFO sightings are so common in Japan that its military has reportedly ordered all pilots to disclose any and all identified flying objects directly to the Japanese government. Not only that, but Japanese self-defense forces have also undergone extensive training in relation to UFO sighting protocol. To date, 6 alleged encounters between pilots and UFOs have been reported to the Japanese government, one of which was recorded, and depicts 10 white circular balls flying through the skies of Osaka in Japan. While the government has yet to publicly comment on any of the incidents, the update of self-defense protocol alone is pretty telling. The next image was shared by a pretty reputable source, National Geographic. The image was captured by Sergio Loaiza on September 4th of 1971 during an aerial survey of Lake Cote. Everything seemed pretty normal until the photos were taken back to Loaiza's development lab, where he noticed something very strange. A metallic flying aircraft, estimated to have a diameter of 160 feet, was located in the corner of one of the photographs. When he presented the photos to his superiors at the National Geographic Institute, they shut him down quick, forbidding Sergio as well as his colleagues from sharing any information of what they had seen that day. In 1979, however, the photograph was leaked, and the object that appeared in the image was officially classified as an unidentified flying object. In 2021, the existence of the object was again confirmed after the original copy of the photograph was scanned, and it was revealed that the UFO's presence was more than just a scratch on the lens or a piece of dust in the wind. So what do you think it was? Let us know in the comments. Next up, we have footage that comes to us straight from the declassifieds. Remember how I told you at the beginning of the video that the government quite literally copped to the fact that they have been hiding the existence of UFOs for years? Well, they did, and they came with receipts. On the 15th of January in 2023, while surveilling an MQ-9 Reaper aircraft, an unidentified aerial presence was captured moving at speeds unreachable by any of Earth's modern-day technological advances. Not only this, but as the object whizzed through the field of view of the camera lens, it appeared to leave behind an atmospheric wake before disappearing completely into the sky. Guys, if you have any, please leave your UFO and alien stories in the comments. I would love to hear about your experiences with any of these kind of things. Next up, we have arguably the most beautiful alien assuming photograph I have ever seen. The photo was taken in 2004 by a retired Royal Air Force officer while on vacation in Sri Lanka. The site was described as some kind of colorful giant donut in the sky with hues of oranges, pinks, purples, and whites. After its capture, the photograph was turned into the Royal Air Force Flying Dales base in North Yorkshire in England, where it became a classified document held by the Ministry of Defense. The image has since been declassified, of course, and is now available for public viewing, but there is still a lot of mystery surrounding the photo as well as the photographer, as his identity, along with any other information regarding the incident, is pretty much non-existent. I mean, come on, it's a giant glowing light in the sky. You're really telling me no one else saw this and that there's no other information out there other than the fact that the photo exists? Oh, yeah, and not only that, but it was deemed classified by the British Ministry of Defense, so I'm thinking there's something else going on here. Okay, I bet you didn't know that another major hotbed for extraterrestrial, UFO, and unidentified aerial phenomenon activity was Brazil. I mean, I did, but maybe you didn't. In fact, this kind of thing is so popular in Brazil that they have an annual day of recognition for these sightings known as the Night of the UFO, which came to be after a major event took place in 1986. On the night of May 19th, a series of unidentified flying objects were seen in the skies of Brazil, and even more non-visual objects were detected via radar across the skies of 4 Brazilian states. Of course, at this time, any and all knowledge the government had on the event was extremely classified. In May of 2012, however, Brazil's Freedom of Information Act went into place, after which the public demanded the release of all the documents relating to the incident. The government complied, and not only released written documents of the events, but also a series of photographs depicting strange activity within the skies above Brazil. Although the images of what appeared to be nothing more than squiggles and clouds of smoke didn't provide much clarity, a statement made by the Minister of Aeronautics did. He said, "This command is of the opinion that the phenomena are solid and reflect, in a certain way, intelligence, due to the ability to follow and maintain a distance from observers, as well as to fly information." After this statement was made, the Brazilian government has still not been able to confirm exactly what took place the day the Night of the UFOs was born. Next, we have a photo taken in 1990 by 2 Scottish chefs who were working in a hotel near the area in which the photograph was taken. After a long day of work, it appears the 2 men had decided to take a hike in an attempt to blow off some steam. While this walk wouldn't end up being incredibly relaxing, it would be wildly exciting, as not long after the 2 men had set off on their journey along the Calvine Scottish countryside, they noticed something hovering above them in the sky. The object was not one that either of the men could identify, and so they pulled out their cameras in an attempt to document the 100-foot flying aircraft instead. The photos, which have been analyzed and show no signs of manipulation, capture the object being circled by a jet plane. They thought the incident was incredibly strange and even newsworthy, so the 2 turned the footage over to the local newspaper for publication, but the images were seized by the British Ministry of Defense and were never released. Until 32 years later, that is, by David Clark, who, unbeknownst to the ministry, had kept a photocopy of one of the original images. The identity of the 2 men was never revealed, nor did they ever come forward to share their story after the images had been seized by the ministry, begging the question of what exactly they saw and what exactly the government was trying to cover up. A photograph taken of an unidentified aircraft lit up by military spotlights in Los Angeles, California, is next on the list. The photograph, which documents an event so big it later became referred to as the Battle of Los Angeles or the Great Los Angeles Air Raid, was taken on February 23rd of 1942, just 2 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor. On the night the photo was taken, all of Los Angeles was under blackout, as directed by the US military. While the lights on the ground had been turned off, the sky above had been lit up by a myriad of strange objects. The military opened fire, and onlookers stood absolutely stunned as 1,400 rounds of ammunition appeared to have no effect on the unidentified flying object. Smoke filled the sky, and when it cleared, not a single craft was to be found in the sky or on the ground. Shrapnel that appeared to have ricocheted off the target resulted in the death of 5 civilians. Furthermore, 3 were killed in car accidents due to the chaos of the event, and 2 more of heart attacks due to the stress of the 2-hour-long attack. And finally, we have a handful of screen grabs from a video taken by Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich whilst flying an 18F Super Hornet fighter jet over the Pacific Ocean near San Diego during a training mission for the United States Navy. The footage, taken in November of 2004, was captured after Dietrich was asked to investigate a suspicious object that had been seen dropping from 80,000 feet down to the surface of the ocean and then vanishing. When Alex and their colleague arrived on the scene, the ocean's surface, where the object had been reported, appeared as though it was boiling. Moments after arriving to investigate, a strange, elongated white object came into view and was captured on video hovering above the water before it disappeared into the sky at an impossible speed, leaving no wake in the oceans below. While the footage has been confirmed to be authentic by the United States Department of Defense, the object itself, along with its origins, remains a mystery.